The male and female are like the two wings of a bird, and when both wings are reinforced with the same impulse, the bird of humanity will be enabled to soar heavenward to the summit of progress. Abdul Baha.
Thank you so much. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to please save all your questions until after the talk when we'll have our question and answer portion. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat below. So our speaker this week is Dr. Sepideh Taheri, and her topic is Getting Off to the Right Start, a Baha'i Perspective on Equality of the Sexes. Sepideh Taheri has been serving as a pediatrician and associate professor at Western University in London, Canada since 2014, where she combines clinical work with teaching and research. Previously, she was a consultant pediatrician and honorary senior clinical lecturer at the Royal Hospital for Sick Children at the University of Edinburgh. She has a special interest in the areas of health, advancement of women, and comparative religion. She has conducted many courses and lectured widely on these and other topics. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Taheri.
Thank you very much indeed, Bayan, for this opportunity to address what I think is a very, very important yet little acknowledged subject, although it has been getting more attention recently. So I'd like to share with you some slides, if I may. All right. I hope everybody can see this. Yes? Good. Okay, so I was actually asked at relatively short notice to speak today, so I apologize in advance if the discussion is maybe a little bit disorganized or the slides may need to be shuffled a little. But this is based on a talk that I was asked to give a few years ago at the Modern Church Conference of the Church of England to a number of priests and ministers and bishops and other clergy of the Church of England. I was asked to give this address by the then chaplain of Edinburgh University. So she was particularly impressed by the way that the Baha'i community had instituted the concept of the equality of the sexes within its administration right from the very start. So this is a synopsis of that talk, although it is expanded somewhat to reflect some more recent changes, and also because I have more time to discuss this topic in a greater depth. So the outline of this talk is that we will very briefly review the history of the equality of the sexes, or the history of women's role in the world, and look at this principle of the equality of the sexes in more detail, and then discuss the history of gender equality, of the development of gender equality in the Baha'i international community, and the role of women in advancing civilization as a whole as we go forward, and some perspectives on this. Now, I've been asked to give a very brief introduction to the Baha'i faith, as there may be many people here who may not have even heard of the Baha'i faith. And if you have not, then please go to this wonderful website. This is the official website of the Baha'i International Community. It's called www.baha'i.org, where you can explore what the Baha'i faith is, what Baha'is believe, and what Baha'is do. And there are many different subsets of this website in many different languages. So the Baha'i faith, in short, is the latest iteration of our Creator's will for humanity at a stage when we have evolved from our earliest stages of our development as an infant and a child, and now going through a very turbulent, I'm sure you'd agree, and tumultuous period of adolescence, as we are preparing to finally achieve our maturity. So the Baha'i Faith teaches that for each stages of our development, according to our capacity, according to the needs and challenges, according to the requirements of the day, that our Creator, our loving Creator, whatever this Creator may be called in different languages and in different spiritual traditions, sends us these teachers, these avatars, these Buddhas, these manifestations of God, these incarnations of the divine, so that we may be guided, we may be enlightened, we may be able to progress and carry forward an ever advancing civilization. And this process, according to the Baha'i teachings, and in fact, if you look carefully at the other traditions, spiritual traditions, is an eternal process. There is the same changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And that we at all times, we as human beings, no matter how advanced we become, no matter if we become angels walking on this earth, will still require at all times, under all conditions, someone to exhort us, to guide us, to instruct us, and to teach us. And this process happens through the instrumentality of one of these spiritual figures, these spiritual educators of humankind that appear from age to age to help us advance civilization. And so the Baha'i Faith, or Baha'u'llah's revelation, is the latest iteration of this ever progressive revelation of the divine to human beings, so that we may not walk in darkness, but walk in the light, and we may achieve higher and higher levels of understanding, of consciousness, and evolve to build higher and higher degrees of unity and complexity. So why do we need to perhaps look at definitely look at the Baha'i experience and the Baha'i international community? Because in fact, in a very short period of time, the Baha'i community has become the most diverse yet unified body of people on our little planet Earth. And it represents a microcosm of humanity and the arrowhead of an awakening in consciousness that is taking place all over the world. And the Baha'is are actively engaged in new models of community building, which have not been experimented before. And they work with all of their other like-minded individuals and groups in the world, with no barriers, no obstacles, no concepts of difference, no concepts of me and the other. So they work together in an outward-looking orientation with people who are also working towards the betterment of humanity in new models of community building that is so desperately required as we see signs of disintegration and atomization occurring all over the world in the old systems, as we're trying to hold on to the old ways of doing things, and they no longer minister to the needs of our ever-evolving and maturing human society. And this Baha'i international community, these new models of community building are actually offered as models for scientific inquiry, for scientific research and investigation. And indeed, more and more people throughout the world, more and more thinking people throughout the world, and indeed people from all backgrounds and all echelons of society, are studying the Baha'i model and interested in the fundamental concepts and offering it as a model that could be emulated by people all over the world, both at individual level, at community level, and at institutional level, local, regional, national, and international. So please, Even if you just stop here, just look at this model, study it, investigate it, do your own scientific and unbiased research on this incredible movement that I regularly state is the most progressive movement on the face of the planet. So then looking at some of the concepts that are fundamental to our discussion, the most important fundamental principle relating to what we are discussing now, which is gender equality, is that this equality of women and men is the foundational principle of the Baha'i faith, right from its very inception in 1844. So the modern church asked me to talk about getting it right from the start, how the Baha'i faith managed to establish equality. And they were curious to know, what did we do that we have this principle of the equality of women and men and the involvement of women in every level of the Baha'i community right from the start. So this is what the initial question was. And one of the fundamental aspects of this question is that the equality of women and men was established by the founders of the faith right from the very beginning. And so the Baha'i community in fact has a very long experience in translating this principle into social change. And the Baha'i international community actually achieved consultative status with the United Nations as an NGO, and has been very active on an international level also to work for the advancement of women. And the Baha'i international community is therefore actively engaged in participating in prevalent social discourses, the achievement of equality of women with men being a central and a principle and a foremost challenge that the Baha'i community has been grappling with. So if you look at a historical perspective of the status of women in society, you will find from all the feminist literature that's available, all the history that is available, there was the history of women pre-19th century, which is one of invariably, and this is throughout the world, by the way, including the East as well as the East, North and South, everywhere throughout the world. And this is direct quote from feminist literature and from historians who are interested in this topic. Pre-19th century, this history of women is that of suppression, subordination, abuse, ignorance, and lack of opportunity. These are quotes from several of these books. And then there is the history of women post-19th century. And here is what you see. These are some pictures of the subordination of women. This is an instrument that is still used widely in many countries for the genital mutilation of women. This is a practice that was widely practiced until very recently, until just a few decades ago, in many countries in the East, where the feet of the young girls were broken and put into a mold so that they would be subordinated and suppressed in their movements and everything else. Then we have the post-19th century. And these are quotes from books relating to the history of women. Change came in the 19th and 20th centuries. Even if you look at the historical scientific opinion, it is absolutely established that women, even from a scientific perspective, were considered inferior in every respect to men. So here is a quote from someone who has been hailed as one of the greatest in a sense, scientists of our age, and his theory of evolution is still being taught in many schools and in many areas of higher education. So this is what he said, and this is 1809 to 1882, Charles Darwin. He says, men attain a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can women, whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands. If two lists were made of the most eminent men and women in poetry, painting, sculpture, music, inclusive of both composition and performance, history, science, and philosophy, with half a dozen names under each subject, the two lists would not bear comparison. We may also infer from the law of the deviation from averages, the average of mental power in man must be above that of women. And of course, they weighed the brains of women and they weighed the brains of men, and the brains of men weighed significantly more than that of women. And so this was yet another scientific observation which corroborated and vindicated these kinds of statements. It's very sobering. We need to think about this in great detail. There were, of course, some exceptions to the rule. So I'm going to share some of the statements from the Baha'i writings. History records the appearance in the world of women who have been signs of guidance, power, and accomplishment. Often in history, women have been the pride of humanity. For example, Mary, the mother of Jesus. She was the glory of mankind. Mary Magdalene, who played, of course, as we know now, an increasingly prominent role in the whole history of Christianity and in the resurrection of Christianity, in fact, from the crucifixion of Christ. But this was not at all recognized in the past. This is just being recognized literally in the 20th and 21st century. Mary Magdalene, Asiya, daughter of Pharaoh, the one who saved Moses, the baby Moses, as he was floating on the river, and changed the course of history, literally, forever. Sarah, wife of Abraham, Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, and innumerable others have glorified the human race by their excellences, and pretty much most of them have not been recognized, or maybe just marginally recognized for what they did. And this is a very interesting and powerful statement from the Baha'i writings about the impact of women in history, which has, to my knowledge, never ever been acknowledged. If you find such an accomplishment, please let me know, but I'm pretty sure you won't. Again, it is well established in history that where woman has not participated in human affairs, the outcomes have never attained a state of completion and perfection. On the other hand, every influential undertaking of the human world, wherein woman has been a participant, has attained importance. And there are many examples of this that we can go into in great detail, but we don't have time for it in this session, hopefully another one. And this is a very profound and revolutionary statement coming from Abdu'l-Baha, the ambassador to humanity, as he was traveling to the West in North America and Europe, promulgating universal peace. And he made these very revolutionary statements at the time when the women's suffrage movement had barely begun. And there was so much resistance to it and so much anti-feminist and anti-woman sentiment, and most people were believing in what Charles Darwin was saying, actually. And these are some examples, some other examples. Esther in the Old Testament, there is a book in her name. Zenobia, Khadija, the incredible wife of Muhammad and the first believer, Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, Queen Victoria, and many, many others who have left abiding impressions on the progress of humanity and in history. Now, why this inferiority throughout history? It's clear. The conditions in the past centuries were due to woman's lack of opportunity, not because she was inherently inferior in creation, as was widely believed and is still believed in many, many, many countries and among many nations in the world. She was denied the right and privilege of education and left in her undeveloped state. Naturally, she could not and did not advance. And the reason for this lack of opportunity is because the world in the past has been ruled by force, and man has dominated over woman by reason of his more forceful and aggressive quality, both of body and mind. And this is a very well-known scientific fact that you can see in even the earlier stages of childhood, when you have children who are playing with each other in the playground, or even children within a family, a girl and a boy. And in any kind of in any kind of situation where children are involved, you clearly see the domination of the weaker ones by the more forceful and stronger ones. Particularly those who are physically strong tend to dominate and basically sometimes break the rights, and by force try and take and rule over the weaker ones. So this is another statement by Abdu'l-Baha during his travels. And then the post-19th century, and this is a quote. So 19th century from the 1800s, so you're talking about 19 onwards. There is a remarkable awakening because in the women's consciousness, basically. Suddenly you have the suffragette movement, you have women's movements that are rising up. It is like the women who've been for centuries, thousands of years, they've been in their subordinate and suppressed status. Suddenly something happens that they are awakened to their humanity. They suddenly start thinking, well, why can't I also be an active agent within society? Why can I not be given access to education? Why can I not have a voice in the political direction and political future and policy making of my country and the world? Why can I not go to work? Why can I not have a career? Why can I not play an equal part in every movement in the world? There is this incredible awakening. And so you have the rise of women's movements. You have the development of women's studies in all over the world, in institutions of higher learning. You have the establishment of women's educational institutions. We have several of them even in London. So in fact, the history of women is only, dear friends, 1 century and no more than that. Because before that, it was in total darkness and unanimity and ignorance. And the Baha'i Faith teaches that whenever there is a new manifestation of God, or one of these prophets or messengers or avatars or Buddhas or Krishnas appear on the earth, then a new spiritual springtime is ushered in, that everyone is affected, whether consciously or unconsciously. And the vast majority, of course, are unconscious, like the plants are, of the source of their new life. And so the same is happening in this day. The same thing is happening since the inauguration of this intervention of the divine in our history. And a new life as a result is in this age stirring within all the peoples of the earth, a new springtime. Yet, I should say, a few have recognized its cause or perceived its motive. The majority have not yet discovered the cause or the motive or the purpose of this new spiritual springtime, this new awakening that is taking place everywhere, and especially in the half of the world population, 50% of the world population who have been asleep so far. And before I go further, I wanted to just make a quick mention of some of the terminology that you find in the Baha'i writings when describing women, particularly in terms of Baha'u'llah's writings and so on. So the word that is often used to describe women is handmaiden. So a handmaiden of the Creator, the handmaiden of God, whereas men are called servants. Okay. Or another word is or maidservants, for example, but handmaidens versus servants. And the women are described as leaves, which is very interesting. Whereas the branches, the supporting branches, is the term that is used for men. So guess where the photosynthesis takes place? It's in the leaves, right? So the creative force, but they have to be supported by the branches. And of course, we're all connected to the root and to the trunk and to the root, which is the world of humanity and the, basically the root principles of true faith. So this is a statement from Baha'u'llah himself, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the founder of the Baha'i faith, which is in his own writings, and this is in the 1860s and 70s and 80s. So just think about this, when Darwin was saying what he was saying, and everybody was against, pretty much the majority of people were against. They didn't even know what to think of women, because they were thinking they're even on an animal plane. Many people thought that they weren't even on the human plane. But here is what Baha'u'llah is saying. Just think of the revolutionary aspect of this. He is saying that's God, has lifted distinctions from between his servants, that's the men, and handmaidens, the women. And through his consummate favors and all-encompassing mercy, has conferred upon all a station and rank on the same plane. Just remember, however, that Baha'u'llah also says that women and men have always been and will always be equal in the sight of God. But previously, it was not possible for this equality to be established on a social level in the world because of the more primitive stage of our evolution in terms of infancy and childhood. Men and women were not ready to have this principle enacted on the social level. And so here now, in this stage of our evolution, we are ready, finally, to enact this fundamental principle on the societal level. And Baha'u'llah goes on to say, he has broken the back of vain imaginings with the sword of utterance, because the sword, the physical sword, has also been abolished. Violence of any sort has been abolished in this revelation, even though it was absolutely allowed in the previous revelations. He has broken the back of vain imaginings with the sword of utterance and has obliterated the perils of idle fancies, like Charles Darwin, like what we heard in the previous, many other people saying previous to this, obliterated the perils of idle fancies through the pervasive power of his might. And he says, in this day, okay, the hand of divine grace has removed all distinction. And this is so, so profound, dear friends. The servants of God, that's the men, and his handmaidens, the women, are regarded on the same plane. I get very emotional because this is a subject that's very close to my heart. I apologize. By my life, he says, so Baha'u'llah is swearing by his life, the names of the handmaidens, the women who are devoted to God, are written and set down by the pen of the Most High. The pen of the Most High is representative of the manifestation of God, because the manifestation of God is like almost the pen of God. that is moving in the world of creation and among us. In the Crimson Book being a metaphor for the book of God, for the book of creation. And then actually goes on to say something else, which is really remarkable. He says, that is, these handmaidens, they excel over men in the sight of God. Because they have to do a lot more work as well to catch up, with the men. Sorry. And then again from the Baha'i writings, that from the beginning of existence until the promised day, which Baha'is believe is this day, because this is the day that has been promised in all the holy books of the past. And we call it the promised day because it is the time when humanity will finally achieve maturity. The reason why a baby's born is that he or she may develop throughout the earlier stages and come of age, attain the stage of maturity of fruit bearing. And this is the time of the promised day, which is today. We're so lucky to be living in this age. From the beginning of existence until the promised day, which is this day, men retain superiority over women in every respect. But in this wondrous dispensation means this period in history, this religious dispensation, the supreme outpouring of the glorious Lord became the cause of manifest achievements by women. So the reason why there is an awakening, a remarkable awakening in the post-19th century, is because of this supreme outpouring of the glorious Lord and this new spiritual springtime. It just doesn't come out of nothing. Everything must needs have a cause, a motive power, an animating principle. There has to be a cause behind any movement. It's a scientific principle. It just doesn't suddenly come out of thin air or no reason. And some handmaidens arose who excelled men in the arena of knowledge. So this is Abdul Baha talking to populations throughout the world about this, some of the early results of this. They arose with such love and spirituality that they became the cause of the outpouring of the bounty of the sovereign Lord upon mankind. And with their sanctity, purity, attributes of the spirit, led a great many to the shore of unity. And the purpose of Women Awakening is that they may work for the betterment of humanity and lead everyone to the shores of unity, which is the basic disease affecting humanity is disunity. We are so disunited in every respect. We do not know who we are. We are not united with our spirit. Our body, soul, mind, spirit is disunited. We are not united with our fellow human beings. We are not united with the planet Earth or with the cosmos. This is the major issue, is that of a disunity. And the women have, there are examples now of how they are working to lead more and more people, more and more souls to the shore of unity, which is the panacea, the remedy for the problems and ills of humanity. And he goes on to say that they became a guiding torch to the wanderers in the wastes of nothingness. And he says, this is a bounteous characteristic of this wondrous age, which has granted strength to the weaker sex, i.e. women, and has bestowed masculine might upon womanhood. And so physical force is losing its dominance. And so there are some encouraging signs of this new awakening. And if you look at the history, just a short, again, brief look at the rise of women's movements in the 19th and 20th century, there is a very good book called The Calling by Hilary Chapman and Mr. Ahdieh, who is looks at the rise of women's movements in the East and the West. And in the East, Taheri was the first woman to actually arise for the rights of women and for the for the women's liberation, in fact. And then you have the suffragette movement, and at the same time you have some of the women's movements and the conference in Seneca Falls happening in 1852, which is very interesting. And the rise of men's consciousness also of the need for change is also beginning in this early 20th century. So it is really important to study the life of this remarkable woman called Taheri, who lived from 1817 to 1852. She was born into a prominent clerical family in Iran. She was taught theology by her father, and in fact, she obtained the highest certificate, the highest level of education from her father, and in fact, a doctorate, which unfortunately she had to burn. She was given this doctorate, but she kissed the certificate and then she had to burn it, because there is no way that she could have become an independent preacher or an ayatollah or a mullah or, a religious clergy like a mujtahid, a doctor of Islamic law in Iran, in the darkest East, in the middle of the 1800s. So she would teach from, and she in fact did the best sermon of her father that became the most famous sermon that she composed. She converted to the Messianic Bahá'í movement in 1844, becoming one of the first group of 17 disciples, that in fact the 18 disciples of the Bab. And she had a very radical view of religion. And of course, she was opposed by the secular and religious rulers of the earth. And her singular contribution to the women's movement in the East was that she is the first woman in the history of the world who in fact took her veil off in public in 1848. And to the chagrin and the dismay of, in fact, many people at that time, she was called the calamity of the age in ratiocination and the trouble of the world in argumentation, because she was so powerful and so eloquent. And her story is amazing. I would really encourage you to read it. It is so inspiring. She was the one who arranged the first women's groups in Iran. And because of the outspoken nature of her discourse and the revolutionary ideas that she held about everything, every aspect of society, because she was at the height, at the arrowhead of this consciousness. Her consciousness was way more advanced than anyone in her age, or even now, to be honest, and for centuries to come. She was choked to death. She was martyred because both the secular and the religious authorities in Iran were dismayed and scared to death, literally, of her spreading influence and of the following that she was, and the attention that she was getting, and the large, huge numbers of hundreds of thousands that were following in her footstep. So she was choked to death, and before she was strangled, at the height of her career, at the age of 34, she said, "You can kill me as soon as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women." And she is hailed as the first woman suffrage martyr. And according to many Western authors, including the one that is mentioned here, she was not only a prodigy of beauty, but also of intelligence. Some of the other Westerners wrote that if there was no other proof for the truth of the Bahá'í movement, of this Messianic movement, which was the herald of the Bahá'í faith, and of course of Bahá'í, the two are, together. If there was no other proof of the truth of this movement, the appearance of such a woman as Taheri in that society is sufficient proof of the truth of this movement. And they said that the appearance of a woman like Taheri in any age and in any country was a rarity. But in Iran, in that period of darkest period of history, is an absolute miracle. So as we have Taheri in the East, giving her life for the emancipation of women, and that's 1817, I apologize for the typo. In the West, you have the awakening of women's movements that started in the middle of the 19th century again, and culminating in the first convention of women's suffrage in Seneca Falls in New York in 1848, which is very fascinating. And then you have the rise of the suffrage movement, the women's suffrage movement, predominantly in the UK and in the United States. So here we have Emmeline Pankhurst, who is in the UK and is being arrested by the British police. She says, we are here not because we are law breakers, we are here in our efforts to become law makers. There is a really good film that came out a few years ago called Suffragette. And I would recommend that you go and watch that film. It's very, very interesting and very evocative of what the processes that was happening. Emmeline Pankhurst, many of the other suffragettes, by the way, met with Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha advised them on the course of action. So Abdu'l-Baha, the ambassador of humanity, the ambassador of peace, the son of Baha'u'llah, who was traveling. And so the Baha'i concept of gender equality is that the world of humanity has two wings. One is woman and the other man. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. And should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. An example that was brought by one of my friends, who was a man actually, he said that for centuries, this wing of women has been weak and it has atrophied. For thousands of years, since the beginning of our history, this wing has been atrophied, so it's weak. And this wing of the men has been strong. So we have to have patience, because it's taken centuries and thousands of years for this weak wing that has atrophied. Okay, it's going to take us a long time also. Maybe not thousands of years and many centuries ahead, but it's going to take, because things are moving at such a rapid pace, over the last century and a half. We've come so far, but we have to be patient, because this building of this muscle, building of this wing will take time. And we have to have patience with ourselves, with our men, with the rest of society as we try to establish this. This was a very good tip that and a point that was that one of my friends explained to me. And then this is again a further statement about the role, the centrality of the role of women in establishing prosperity for all humankind. And this is a very revolutionary statement. Not until the world of women becomes equal to the world of men in the acquisition of virtues and perfections can prosperity be attained as they ought to be. And I think one of the most important, again, fundamental principles that the Baha'i Faith teaches is that we need to have this balance of feminine and masculine qualities, not the dominance of one over the other. We're not feminists that want to rule the world and do everything that the men do, and in every single sense that you may think about. But it's got to be more a balance of feminine, masculine qualities. Yes, we are equal on the spiritual realm. We are equal. We should have equality of opportunity in progress, in contribution to society, in education, in our rights, etc. But it does not mean that women have to become men, or that women have to dominate the world or dominate their men. That's so important. There is a balance. And Abdu'l-Baha explains that in some respects, woman is superior to man. She is more tender-hearted, more receptive. Her intuition is more intense. these qualities are corroborated by the findings of science. Women generally, by nature, are peacemakers. They are less prone to want to have conflict. And this oneness of humankind, this predominant spirit of our time, the fundamental realization of global consciousness and global responsibility, when, as Baha'u'llah tells us, we need to regard the world as a human body, is something that the women have absolutely to not only adopt and understand, but also try to spread it to their children and to the future generations. Because the education of girls from the Baha'i perspective, and this is another revolutionary principle regarding the equality of the sexes, is that the education of girls should be given priority. These are some examples of a center of learning established by the Cambodian Organization for Research, Development and Education, which is a Baha'i-inspired organization in Batongbek, Cambodia, focused on education. And this other picture is a school, Baha'i-inspired school in Colombia. The education of girls has to be given priority as per the writings and teachings of Baha'u'llah. And it is interesting that other organizations, other people, through a lot of research and experience, have come to realize this, gradually as the 20th century came to a close. And this is a graph from a book called My Name is Today, where they have published from the United Nations, where they've published findings of decades-long study that the education of girls is closely associated with a falling infant mortality and birth rate and improved nutrition. Train a woman and you train an individual, train a man and you build a nation, by a bishop of all people in 1985, indicating how many men as well, and many previously perhaps people who were unaware and organizations who were unaware of the importance of giving priority to education of girls, have come to realize the centrality of this principle. And I just want to finish with a few examples. I know we don't have that much time. There's always a lot to discuss, but I just wanted to give some examples of how right from the start, the women with this newfound faith were placed at the vanguard of progress in every respect in the Baha'i community. And a galaxy of unforgettable women became the principal exponents of the Baha'i message on both sides of the Atlantic. So you have the example of Laura Dreyfus-Barney, one of my favorite heroines. I have her picture on my mantelpiece. Some of you will see her every time you come here. And women at the vanguard of scholarship. She is responsible for asking questions and compiling the answers from Abdu'l-Baha in a volume that has become the fundamental basis philosophical reference book for at least 1,000 years to come. And she did many other things too, in the realm of the advancement of women and peace and so on in France and across many, many countries, but I don't have time to go into her story. She absolutely was one of the women at the vanguard of scholarship. You have a woman like Martha Root, another American lady who was at the vanguard of promoting peace and sharing the Baha'i teachings, these progressive teachings with the leaders of thought, with the leaders of governments throughout the world. A highly accomplished journalist. She traveled the globe, circled the globe 3 times, all alone, in the early 1900s. It's remarkable. And she met with presidents, with professors, with leaders of thought everywhere throughout the world. and shared these principles and teachings of Baha'u'llah, which are indispensable for the establishment of peace and prosperity throughout the world. You have, in fact, Martha Root succeeded in converting Queen Marie of Romania, women as enlightened leaders, an enlightened leader and the first crowned monarch to publicly declare her acceptance of these wonderful teachings and spreading these teachings using her position as a monarch throughout Europe and America. You have women at the vanguard of society building. We have Dr. Susan Moody, who was commissioned by the central figures of the faith, in fact, by Abdul Baha, to go to Iran and become the first gynecologist and the first obstetrician, the first doctor who actually took care of women's health issues. There was nobody else before that could look after women in that society. Just imagine. First of all, there were no women doctors in that society. Secondly, there were men. Which woman in the early 20th century in dark Iran, Persia, would have wanted a man to look at them? No one. So Dr. Susan Moody was the first one who went there and established a clinic, and all women from all backgrounds and all walks of life came to her, and she helped establish the discipline in Iran. At the same time, she taught children's classes, and she was the co-founder of the Tarbiyat, which means Education School for Girls, which provided secular education for girls, and in fact was not only the co-founder but helped provide the curriculum for secular education. And then they were open to everyone. Women at the vanguard of international advocacy and justice. You have the example of Keith Ransom Kehler, who was actually sent by the guardian of the Baha'i faith as a representative of the international Baha'i community to go to Iran and to advocate for the rights of the oppressed Baha'i brothers and sisters to the court of the Shah, of Iran. Just imagine an American woman going to the court of the Shah of Iran and advocating for the rights of the oppressed and persecuted Baha'i community in Iran. And in fact, she gave her life for the Baha'is. She spent many years there, and she caught smallpox in Isfahan and passed away there. She literally sacrificed her life and for her Persian brothers and sisters, and is hailed as the first American Baha'i martyr. Remarkable. This is another picture of her with some more detail. You have Dr. Genevieve Lenore Coy, who was the second director of the Tarbiyat School for Girls in Tehran. These are some of the first schools for girls that were established in the East, guys. This is amazing. And you find that this principle of the universal compulsory education is for every son and daughter, for every child, is right in the Book of Laws of Baha'u'llah, that unto every father has been enjoined the instruction of his son and daughter in the art of reading and writing, and in all that has been laid down in the Holy Tablet. And then Baha'u'llah says, he that puts away that which is commanded unto him, in other words, a father who does not fulfill the responsibility of providing for the education of his son and daughter, the trustees, that is the trustees of the House of Justice, that is the trustees of the government, they are then to take from him that which is required for their instruction if he be wealthy, and if not, the matter devolves upon the House of Justice. So it is so important, universal compulsory education for the son and the daughter, with the primacy being given to that of the girls. There's a lot more to say. I'll finish quite soon. One of the first schools in Iran, this is a picture that was established in 1930. This is one of the Tarbiyat schools. So this is for girls. At that time, it wasn't co-education. Co-ed was not possible. So these are just some pictures. With their emphasis on the education of girls, Baha'i schools promoted an entire generation of highly educated women in Iran, and they were open to everyone. Zoroastrians, Muslims of all backgrounds, Christians, Jews. In fact, the first cohort of educated women came from these schools. Here are shown members of the committee, Baha'i Committee for the Advancement of Women in 1950 in Tehran. Just look at this and contrast this with what? Last but not least, the first appointed female leader of a worldwide organization in the history of humanity was actually Bahia Khanum, whose title is the greatest holy leaf. Remember, leaf was the name that was given to the women. And she is the daughter of Baha'u'llah, in fact, and she was appointed as the leader of the Baha'i international community, the Baha'i worldwide community, for several years, for a significant period of time, and she guided the development of the Baha'i community internationally. And it is absolutely fascinating to read her story, and she indeed is the greatest exemplar for women and what they could achieve despite terrible atrocity, terrible tribulation, which she suffered her whole life. I think probably we will have to stop here because there is very little time, but I was just going to say that finish with this. I have several other slides, but I wanted to make some more if we have time. Bayan, do we have time for 5 more minutes?
Yes, of course.
Good, that's great. That an exceedingly important fundamental concept in the Baha'i teachings is that women have a central role in advancing civilization and in international arbitration and universal peace. This is a profoundly important topic that I will finish with, because women, in fact, will be the greatest factor in establishment of peace. Why? In short term, they can be opponents of war, and they can help with political unification when they enter capably and fully the arena of law and politics. But in the longer term, they will have to fulfill their role as educators of peaceful human beings and help with the true spiritual unification of the peoples of the world as one society. If you look at women in leadership right now, there are actually very few of them, maybe about 7% of the leaders of the world are women. But in fact, according to Baha'i writings, the woman will be the greatest factor in establishing peace, and that woman will assuredly abolish warfare among mankind. This is a very significant prophecy. And what this means is that this is a matter which vitally affects women, and when women form a conscious and overwhelming mass of public opinion against war, then there can be no war. And how can women make peace? They should, through teaching and through the active moral support they give to every movement directed towards peace, seek to exert a strong influence on other women's minds in regard to this essential matter. Only as women are welcomed into full partnership in all fields of human endeavor will the moral and psychological climate be created in which international peace can emerge. And so there is a saying that this is the birth of a new opportunity for all. And women's potential is still embryonic, of course, if you think in terms of history. And a new baby is being conceived in this womb. Have a look at this one. Look at what happened there. A new baby is being conceived, has been conceived, in fact, and it is growing. This embryo is growing of this new opportunity. But this newly born babe is traversing in one night the path that needeth 100 years to tread. So true peace and tranquility will only be realized when every soul will have become the well-wisher of all mankind. So thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. I wanted to just finish with this nice picture of lovely girls who are being educated to become peacemakers. And this is a picture of my own daughter when she was much younger and her friend at a party, fancy dress party. The future lies in these girls and the men and the boys who will help them and support them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taheri. I really loved this talk, and I loved a lot of the historical information that I didn't know before. So I'm really appreciative. And now we have time for questions. So if anybody has any questions, they can put it in the chat. So our first question says, in what ways is the equality of the sexes a spiritual principle and not just a social or political one?
Excellent question. Well, as we are spiritual beings, we are beings with a spiritual identity. So as I didn't put that quote up, but I know it off by heart, that women and men have always been equal and always shall be equal in the sight of God. So we are spiritual in our identity, but in this world, and in fact, spirit has no gender, which is also extremely important to realize. But in this world of matter, we have been endowed with a physical body and characteristics, and gender differentiation is something that is a fundamental factor of this world from its creation. You also find in Genesis, in the Quran, in all the holy books and so on, talking about creating God creating the various creatures in the world, and that he made them male and female, right? So this principle of the opposites, the principle of feminine and masculine, is something that has been embodied within the whole of creation. And it's actually a very deep subject, because if you think about procreation and even the history of the creation of the physical universe, it is the interaction between the active force and that which is its recipient. Also in the Hermetic principles, if you look at Hermes and his 7 principles, this is one of the fundamental principles. That is this polarity, this feminine and masculine, this yin and yang, these opposites, the active force, that which is its recipient, male and female, is embodied within every aspect of the physical creation. And so there is a deeply spiritual aspect to feminine and masculine qualities. And the way that they balance each other is so important as well. And that is something that is a fundamental aspect of creation here. I don't know if I answered you or not, but but it is as much as spiritual. In fact, it is the spiritual foundation that guides our social action, that guides our understanding of the need for this balance and not dominance of one over the other. And so everything comes from conscious knowledge of the fundamental principles. Otherwise, how can we build how can we build something on a foundational principle that's erroneous? So we have to have that spiritual understanding first in order to be able to address everything else. Otherwise, it just becomes limited.
Thank you. Another question asks, can you explore the concept of leaf as a representation or metaphor of women in the faith? As leaves form on branches of a tree, so it could be argued that women are dependent on men in the same way a leaf needs a branch.
That's true, it could be. But then if you look at oneness, if you look at all of the perspective of creation and purpose of life and our perspective of reality as oneness, then then you don't have any dichotomy, you don't have any conflict that arises from that. The men are created stronger in their anatomy. They are created stronger in many ways. They have certain qualities, even from the hunter-gatherer situation in the past and even now, there is no doubt that men are stronger in some respects. But as we read earlier, women have certain other qualities that may be more prominent. It doesn't mean that the men shouldn't have those qualities and women should not have certain masculine qualities. No, but the idea is that of oneness, and the idea is that of and mutual cooperation, and the two wings going together. So the primary role of a man or a father, first of all, the primary purpose of having the male and female gender and of purpose of marriage is that of procreation, right? So that there may always be someone or a rational being that is capable of knowing and loving God and reflecting the qualities of the divine and the continuation of the human race, provided that they actually follow this path and don't ruin everything by their rebellion. But the purpose of human beings' continuation is to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization and to reflect in ever greater measure the will of God, for the will of the Creator for us. So when we view this from this perspective, we see that we have to look at things from the perspective of oneness and from mutual cooperation and support and the balance of feminine and masculine qualities. So the primary role of the father is to provide for the mother and his wife and the children and the education of the children. The primary role of the mother, and this is the most important according to Baha'i teachings, no greater service to the human race can be imagined than that of educating your children, provided that they become fruitful members of society and not as weeds. So the primary role of the mother, and of course with pregnancy, with lactation, with everything else, the primary role of the mother is that of the education of children. Doesn't mean that the father cannot be an educator or will not assume a greater role as that baby grows, and that women cannot provide for the family. Absolutely not. But these are requirements of nature, that the woman is the one who bears the child, the woman is the one who gives birth to the child, the woman is the one who nurses the child, who creates the first bonds of love with the child. The child's outcome depends even on what the mother has had to eat, what the status of the mother has been during pregnancy, how her emotions have been during pregnancy, how she interacts with that child from the moment that that baby is conceived and then onwards. So much of who we are and the realization of human potential depends on the status of the mother and on the level of her consciousness, her health, her education, and so on. So that is why when we talk about the branch as supporting the leaf, which is the organ of photosynthesis, of providing the oxygen, providing the nutrition that the rest of the tree and the rest of the branches and so on are to benefit from, and the rest of society are to benefit from, then there is no dichotomy. because these are metaphors. They're metaphors for some great spiritual principles. And so the one is that of support because of the dictates of biology, the dictates of nature, but by no means exclusive, that we have to be dependent or we have to be, that the one is more important than the other. We're all connected together to the trunk, and then we have the roots as well. So in a sense, you can say, well, the roots are the most important.
Thank you. And we have a comment that says, a branch is equally dependent on the leaf because without the leaf, there's no photosynthesis or respiration. And a branch without a leaf is good for fire at best.
That's right.
We have another question that asks, can you comment on how the relationship between husband and wife ideally could be from the perspective of each of the sexes?
Again, I think that might be something that we could go much more deeply into in another session about relationships, by people who are way more qualified than me to talk about it. But I think again that there is a lot of very interesting material on this for study about marriage and family life and the relationship between a husband and wife. Of course, there should be this concept of the or principle of equality should be paramount in any relationship, in any marital relationship. The foundation should be that of love. The highest form of that love should be the love of God, because if you just love each other for who you are, then we often get disappointed, and it can be a very limited relationship if you're just concentrating on each other. Of course, that love has to be there on a physical and a psychological and a spiritual level between the couple. But if you base this on a much greater understanding of the purpose of life, the purpose of marriage in the first place, the outcomes that you're looking for, right? Then the goal of life that you have, if you have that similar perspective, then you cannot have any relationship except one that is founded on mutual respect, mutual understanding, on mutual love, that being the foundation, on mutual help and support, so that each may feel that they have the opportunity to grow and to develop. And the Baha'i concept of a marital relationship is that the husband and wife should be helpmeets of each other, and they should continuously help their spiritual and physical progress of the other. And that is very important, that helping each other to grow spiritually is also something that has been very, very little recognized within society at large. Often it's just a physical bond, or maybe people haven't thought about it, or it's based on very limited and ephemeral foundations of just physical attraction or convenience, or a matter of convenience, or some lesser loyalties like that. But when the marriage is based on a mutual understanding of the fundamental spiritual reasons behind marriage and the purpose of marriage, then it is a most beautiful relationship that will actually continue forever. So, in some of the marriage verses that are recited very often in the West, it says, I will do this, that, this, I'll be loyal until death do us part, until death parts us. But from the Baha'i point of view, death is not the end. Death does not part you. If you're in a true spiritual as well as physical relationship with your spouse, then this is a union that will last forever into eternity throughout the worlds of God. And you will continue to help each other and progress together and grow together in the worlds of God, in the future eternal realms. So it's a very, very beautiful and deep concept, and one that is worthy of study. There is a wonderful book of study in the institute courses that are offered by the Baha'i community on marriage and family life. I would highly recommend that anybody contemplating getting married, getting into a relationship, or if they are already in a relationship and they want to learn more, to study this together.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions today, but I want to thank you again, Dr. Taheri, for this talk. And I really actually like these questions about marriage and, relationships afterwards, because I think it's a good for a young person like me to hear. So I can reflect on it for the future. So our speaker next week is going to be Miss Peymaneh Parhami, and her topic is going to be, what do Baha'is mean by God? And again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, so you can invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat, and it's also in our YouTube description. Have a great week, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Bye.